all the participants pan India and across the world to the Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University's national webinar on essential aspects of banking law, organized by the Department of Business Law, School of Excellence in Law, Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University. And I take immense pleasure to welcome our today's distinguished speaker and eminent scholar, Dr. Shamjit Sir, Chief Manager, Law, State Bank of India, Commercial Clients Group, Ahmedabad. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Yes. So now I move on to the welcome address. I request Professor Dr. Arita Devi ma'am, convener of this national webinar on the essential aspects of banking law, Director of the Research, Publication and Academic Affairs in the School of Excellence in Law, Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, to deliver the welcome address for the program. Welcome you, ma'am. Before the welcome address, I request the participants to kindly mute your audio and video throughout the session. It's my humble request to the participants to ensure the smooth running of the national webinar. Welcome you, ma'am.
Good morning to one and all present here. Hope I am audible. Yes. At the outset, let me welcome all of you to this one-day national workshop organized by Department of Business Law on the topic Essential Aspects of Banking Laws. At this juncture, today we are all in the days of online banking. Just with our cell phone in our hands, we can do all banking activities. So it's essential to know about the latest banking advancements and also the laws regulating all these banking. So that's the motive, or that's the idea behind bringing in our respected chief guest today, Dr. Shamjit, who is the Chief Manager, Law, State Bank of India, Commercial Clients Group, Ahmedabad. It's a proud moment for Ambedkar Law University also because he happens to be our alumni, because he has done his PhD from the Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University. So as a formality generally, as a convener of this program, I'm given the opportunity or the role of welcoming the gathering. It's my bounden duty to welcome all of you formally. At the outset, let me welcome our guest today, who has spared his very valuable time, because as manager of a banking sector, hardly they get time, and today being it happens to be a holiday here for our state, still he has spared his very valuable time to be with us to explain the essential banking. So on behalf of the Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University and all of them, all the audience who are present here, I welcome you wholeheartedly, sir, for this national workshop.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.
Next, I would like to welcome our registrar, our Professor Balaji sir, who always guides us all through any academic activity. Hope he will be joining us. I also welcome our, I would say, a beloved friend as well as my colleague, Dr. Ranjit Oman Abraham, Assistant Professor of Department of Business Law, who is one among the persons who always very cheerfully helps us in all academic activities. I welcome you, Ranjit sir, for this national workshop. He will be delivering the felicitation address shortly. I also welcome our Dr. Kumudaratna ma'am, who I would say who is the person behind organizing all workshops by our Department of Business Law. I hope she will also be joining us soon. I also welcome all the head of the departments who have joined us for this workshop. I welcome all my colleagues who have spared their very valuable time, because today maybe they thought it would be a holiday, but still they have joined us to know and to make this webinar a very successful one and a very fruitful academic discussion. I welcome all my colleagues and friends who have joined us today. Above all, I welcome all the participants, student participants, as well as all participants from the banking sector also, because yesterday I happened to talk to one person from a cooperative banking sector, Sir Rajkumar sir, and he said he will be forwarding this brochure to All India their banking forum. So I see some of the banking staffs and managers who have joined us today. Thank you for being with us. I welcome you all for this workshop. Hope it will give you a very fruitful discussion and knowledge about the general banking laws. I also welcome our coordinating team, student coordinators, especially the student moderator, Abhishek Castro, who will be moderating this session, and also all the students who worked behind this successful working of this webinar. I welcome you all once again. I welcome the technical team also who will be helping and guiding us through. Hope to have a very pleasant and a good academic discussion. Welcome you all.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for the wonderful welcome address. Now I move on to the felicitation address, the event. Now I request Professor Dr. Ranjit Omen Abraham, sir, Assistant Professor, Department of Business Law, School of Excellence in Law, Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, to deliver the felicitation address for the event. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you, Abhishek. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, sir, you're audible. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So at the outset, it's a very good morning to all of you all. In spite of being a national holiday, we can see a lot of participants who have shown interest and joined this program. As Abhishek rightly said, not only nationally, some of our alumni who are abroad have also joined this webinar. So making it as an international event, and all credit goes to the speaker and the convener who have organized this program. So this is a very important program on banking law. I myself, I'm a banking law teacher, teaching banking law at PG level for the postgraduate students of our university. I have found that this is a very technical and a complex subject. Needs not only academicians like us, but also the students need the help of practitioners to expertise the subject. It is a need of the hour, and we were regularly talking among our academia. We were talking that we need to bring in, rope in lot of talented experts like Dr. Shamjit sir, who would be giving the right opportunity for the students by telling them about the trends and practices and challenges in the subject of banking law. So at this webinar, we are very happy and very glad to have Dr. Shamjit. Thanks to Kumra ma'am who have did all the arrangements, and thanks to Harita ma'am, who's also a director of research and publication, for taking, in spite of her busy schedule because of the PhD selection programs which is going on, she had time to conduct this, organize this program. And this is a very important program for students who are specializing. Maybe if it was a constitutional law program or some other general subject, we would have had a more crowd, more people joining. But here we have a focused crowd. People who are more focused in the subject of banking law, who wants to specialize banking law, who wants to become law officers in bank, who wants to appear for banks in the tribunals and the courts, and who has an interest to even do research in banking law. So that is the list of audience who have registered today and who is planning to listen to Dr. Shamjit. Shamjit sir is highly experienced. He is having 23 years of experience in banking sector. He's been, visiting faculty in many universities throughout India, trainer in many colleges throughout India in the subject of banking law. He is, as Madam rightly said, he's our alumni. So that is we are very proud to say that he's our alumni because he did his PhD in our university. And he has also published books on SARFAESI Act. He has been a regular, expert in banking sector, not only in public sector banks, even in private sector banks. So he has a long profile. But today, everyone are here focused to listen to Dr. Shamjit. So I don't want to stand in between that focus and your interest. I'm sure that, like me, all of you would be concentrating. And in the end, we might have a question and answer session, well moderated by one of our best moderators, Abhishek Castro. So I think that will also be an interesting session. So I take this opportunity to thank all of you all who have come and joined. And also I thank the organizers for giving me also this opportunity to felicitate and to speak few words on this occasion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I'll move on to the inaugural address. I request Professor Dr. B. Balaji, sir,
Yes, sir.
Registrar of the Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, to deliver the
Did he
inaugural address.
join? Castro, did he join? Did sir join? Just check now.
Check it.
Otherwise, you straight away go to sir's session. Sir will be joining late, maybe.
I'll check it.
Yes.
Balaji sir has not joined. We'll move on to the
Yeah, we move
session.
on.
So it's a most awaited moment. So I request our proud alumni, Dr. Shamjit P, Chief Manager Law, State Bank of India, Commercial Clients Group, Ahmedabad, to deliver the session's address. Welcome you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Abhishek. Thanks, Dr. Harita Devi and Dr. Ranjit Uman. It is indeed a great pleasure to be a part of university again. It's actually, I'm taken back, this session has taken back me to 10 years back. In 2010, I joined for the PhD and 2016, I completed it. So it was a wonderful time for me. I spent 6 years in the university as a research scholar. In fact, 2010, I completed my LLM. So after 10 years back, I got back to the campus and I enjoyed the life as a researcher. So thanks to Dr. Kumudharatna Madam also and Balaji sir also for helping me a lot in completing my research project. So today we are going to discuss about the banking essentials of essential banking laws in India. So I would like to share the slides now so that it will.
Yes, sir, you can share your slides. Yes.
Is it visible to all of you?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the topic for discussion today is essential aspects of banking laws. So we will first understand what is banking. Uh, Mainly, yeah, banking in India is actually governed by two important acts. One is a Banking Regulation Act, other one is Reserve Bank of India Act 1934. So these are two acts governing the banking transactions in our country. So RBI and the governments, through the Ministry of Finance, are controlling the banks. So we can say that the birth and the starting and the end of a branch is governed by the permission for the Reserve Bank of India. If you want to open a branch in your country, you need to take a permission with the Reserve Bank of India. Likewise, if you want to close down a branch, a bank branch in any of our places, you also require a license from the permission for the Reserve Bank of India. So winding up from the starting of and opening of a branch up to the winding up, it is controlled by the Reserve Bank of India and the government. Now let's see what is banking. Section 5B of the Banking Regulation Act defines banking. So banking means accepting for the purpose of lending or for investment of deposits of money from the public, repayable on demand or otherwise, and withdrawable by check, draft, or otherwise. That means banking means accepting the deposits of money from the public. So the banks are accepting the deposits of money from the public and this money is used for lending or investment. So basically what the banks are doing, they are accepting the money, surplus money from the public, and this money has been used for lending or investment purposes. And the money which is deposited by the public can be withdrawable, is repayable on demand. On demand means suppose you deposit some money in your saving bank, you can go to the branch and say that I want to withdraw this money, this much of money. So this money can be withdrawable on demand. As per the demand of the depositor, the money can be withdrawn, and it can be withdrawn by check also. If you want to withdraw the money, you can use the check. Now we have this internet bank systems are there. We have a lot of Google Pay is a lot of transaction there where you can transfer the money. So this money can be withdrawable by check. You can transfer the money to another person by giving a check to him, or you can prepare a draft or likewise. So essentially banking means the banks are depositing the collecting the money from the public, and they are using it for lending or investment. Lending means suppose a person came to the branch, approached the bank for setting up an industry. So this money which the bank collected from the depositor, this money will be given to this borrower, and he will be able to establish any unit or run the business on the base of this money lent by the banks. Now, if you look into the banking sector in India, there are three types of banks. You can see there are three types of banks available in your country. One is banks which is established by a separate enactment. Take the case of State Bank of India. State Bank of India is constituted by way of a State Bank of India Act 1955. Like that, public sector undertaking, there is a separate act is there. So the banks which have been constituted through an enactment is called is a one category of banks. So like the State Bank of India, public sector banks, all these banks came into force on the basis of an enactment passed by the parliament. So that is one type of one sector of banks. Another sector is companies under the Companies Act or a foreign company. Banks may be registered as a banking company in India. Take the case of any private sector bank. Take the case of ICICI Bank. Take the case of HDFC Bank. All these banks are registered as a banking companies under the Companies Act. So these banks are working as a operating under the provisions of the Companies Act. And if you look at the third section of banks, it is a cooperative banks. In our country, there are a lot of cooperative banks are there. Actually, cooperative banks are governed by the separate enactment given, passed by the concerned state governments. Each state government has passed a separate cooperative acts. So all these state cooperative banks are coming under the cooperative banking enactments made by the state legislatures. So even though RBI has got a supervisory role over these banks, basically the provisions of these cooperative banks are governed by the state enactments. Yes, now we can understand the relationship between a bank and customer. So how the banking transactions are happening. So there are three constituents actually in the banking sector. In a bank transaction, there are three constituents. One is a banker, other one is a depositor, other one is a borrower. So banker is acting as a middleman here. The depositor is depositing the money to the bank, and the money which is deposited by the depositor is dispersed to the borrowers. So bank is acting as a middleman between a depositor and the borrower. So bank is collecting money from the depositor on a lesser rate of interest. You can see the difference. In the chart, you can see when a person is depositing the money with the bank, you may be getting a rate of interest. Suppose if you deposit some 1 lakh rupees in the bank as a fixed deposit, you may be getting some. Take the example of a 9% rate of interest after 1 year. That means after 1 year, if you withdraw the money, you will get a 9% rate of interest. The same money, if the bank is lending to a borrower, bank will be charging a higher rate of interest, say 13% of interest. So the difference between this 9% and 13%, that is the profit or margin for the banks. So the bank is, maintaining its establishment on the base of this difference between the rate of interest. So bank is lending to a customer at a borrower at a higher rate of interest. So the interest rate which is giving to a depositor is less, while the interest which is paying to the and collecting from the borrower is a high. So recovering the loan with interest is a risk taken by the bank. You may be heard about the non-performing asset in the banking sector. So every day, every year, this non-performing asset is increasing. Banks are working hard to control the non-performing asset. So non-performing asset means an asset which fails to deliver income for the bank. Suppose bank has lent some 10 lakh rupees to a borrower to establish a unit. So he has established unit, but somehow he is not able to run the business, or somehow he has faced some difficulties. He is not able to repay the dues to the bank. So bank is not getting any income from this money which lent to the borrower. So once he has failed to repay the dues, after a period of time, it will convert into a non-performing asset. That means for 90 days, if the borrower is not able to pay either the principal or interest to the bank, the account will be classified as a non-performing asset. So non-performing asset means bank is not able to recover the money from him. Then again, after once it is become a non-performing asset, bank need to file a case, or bank need to proceed under SARFAESI, bank need to proceed under the insolvency and bankruptcy court. So all these legal recourse need to be taken by the bank. So there is no guarantee that the money which is paid to the borrower will come back to you. Suppose the bank has finances some 100%. There is no guarantee that all the 100% will repay the money back to the bank. Maybe some 10% may not be able to repay it. So as far as bank is concerned, this 10% asset is a non-performing asset. So that is the risk bank is bearing. Whenever the bank is lending it, bank cannot expect that all the borrowers will repay all the monies in due time. So, but look into the obligation of the bank. A depositor deposited 1 lakh rupees in the bank. After 1 year, he comes to the branch for withdraw the money. So can the bank say that since we are not able to recover money from the lender, from the borrower, can we stop paying to you? It cannot be done, because RBI says that whatever the money deposited need to be repaid back to the borrower to the depositor along with interest. So bank cannot give an excuse to the depositor that since we have not received the money from the borrower, we will not pay you. We are under obligations to make the payment to the depositor. So the problem is that suppose you lend 10 lakh rupees and you borrow 10 lakhs, deposited a borrower, customer has given, depositor has given 10 lakh. This 10 lakh was given to the borrower for for establishing a unit. The borrower is not paying the money. So 10 lakhs, how the bank will repay the 10 lakhs to depositor? That means the bank has to take on this money from its capital. So once the capital, the money is taken from the capital, if you continuously do it, that means that the capital will be eroded. So ultimately, it will reach to the liquidation of the bank. Bank may not be able to continue its business. So this maintaining this ratio is very important. If you are not able to recover the money from the non-performing assets, the bank will be in great difficulty. So the difference, the difference between the rate of interest of the money paid to the depositor and the money which is collected from the borrower, that need to be maintained. Otherwise, banks continuation will be in great trouble. So interest is the reward for taking the risk. So basically, the interest what the difference in the interest is the reward which the bank is getting for taking the risk. Bank is taking a risk of lending to a borrower, for which there is no guarantee that he will repay it. This is how the banks make money. Suppose depositor we are paying $1. For when you are lending to a borrower, we are collecting $4, and $3 is the profit for the bank. Now we'll look into the important provisions of Reserve Bank of India. Reserve Bank of India Act was enacted in 1934, much before independence, and it was enacted to regulate the issue of banknotes in our country. All of you know that all the currencies in our country is published by or circulated by the Reserve Bank of India. Nobody has got a right to print the currency. Only Reserve Bank has got the right to print the currency. So bank notes in our country, whatever the currency in the country is printed by the Reserve Bank of India, it's under the control of the Reserve Bank of India. So for that purpose, that is one of the main objective for establishing the Reserve Bank of India. Second one, for keeping the reserves for securing monetary stability in India. You know that the monetary system, monetary policy in your country should be stable. If you want to export, if you want to purchase goods from the export from the foreign country, you need foreign exchange. So for all this purpose, you need to have a reserve of foreign exchange for purchasing the goods from the countries, or importing goods from the foreign countries. So importing and exporting and reserves, all this is under the control of the Reserve Bank of India. So it is a responsibility of the Reserve Bank to keep the reserves or keep the monetary stability of our country. Third, to operate the currency and credit system of the country to its advantage. The entire currency, the notes you are getting from the banks, it is controlled by the Reserve Bank of India. I don't know how many of you know that the fact that in every district there is a currency chest is there. That means whatever the money you are getting from the branches, every day evening this money will be deposited in the currency chest of Reserve Bank of India, and next day morning, as per the requirement of each bank, the money will be distributed. Suppose tomorrow, one branch want to disburse a loan of some 10 crore rupees. The branch cannot keep this money in this premises, in his branches. What the banks will do? Banks will give a request to the chest, currency chest. They will they will give the money to the branch, and branch will disburse to the borrower. So this currency system, it's run by the Reserve Bank of India, and now State Bank of India is a nodal authority for running the currency chest. So all the entire country, you can visualize how much of transactions are happening, how much of currency is changing hands. So all this is controlled by the Reserve Bank of India. So one of the main objective of Reserve Bank is to control this currency system in our currency and credit system in our country. And banks need to obtain license from the Reserve Bank under Section 22 of BR Act for commencing and carrying on the business of banking. As I told, without taking a permission or without taking a license from the Reserve Bank, you cannot run a banking business in our country. And no company other than a banking company can use the words bank, banker, or banking as parts of its name. It's very important that only those banks which are registered with the Reserve Bank of India can use the name bank, banker, or banking. In Banking Regulation Act, there is a schedule is there. It's those banks who are coming under the schedule is called the scheduled banks. So only those banks who are coming within the schedule of Reserve Bank of India has got right to use the word bank, banker, or banking. So if any other person is using this term and culture, he will be, he can be punished for this committing an offense. So no organization other than banking can use these words. Banks have to obtain prior permission of RBI for opening a new place of business or changing location of existing place of business. Suppose some bank want to change the location from one place to another. For that also you require a permission from the Reserve Bank. Because banking is a public utility service. Suppose a bank has opened one branch in one area, on the fine morning they cannot shift to another area because it may be inconvenience to the public. You are continuously using the banking transaction in that area. So wherever bank want to open a new branch, wherever bank want to shift the branches, they require the permission from the Reserve Bank of India. Now let's look into the Banking Regulation Act 1949. BR Act was enacted to consolidate and amend the law relating to banking and to provide for a suitable framework for regulating the banking companies. So Banking Regulation Act was enacted to control the banking activities in our country, to consolidate the banking activities in our country. So regulation over business of banking companies. So who are doing banking business, they are coming under the control of the Banking Regulation Act. So whatever banking transaction you are permitted to do only within the powers, within the framework of this Banking Regulation Act. Control over management of banking companies. So all these banking companies are under the control of the Reserve Bank of India. So suppose any bank is any bank is not doing as per the provisions of the act, the Reserve Bank has got right to control the banking, to control, interfere in the management of the banking and control the banking activities. Reserve Bank has got right to change the chairman or to suspend the directors. So wherever there is a anomaly, wherever there is an illegal activities are going on, I mean, as not as per the provisions of the act, Reserve Bank has got control, has got right to remove the chairman and board of directors of the concerned bank. Suspension and winding up a banking business. Reserve Bank can suspend it or the banking operations if it is a violation of the provisions of the act. They can wind up any bank. You may be aware a lot of banks went into trouble and subsequently Reserve Bank has declared moratorium, take control of the management of the bank, merge these banks with the other banks. That recently, Punjab, Maharashtra Cooperative Bank as PMC has been went into liquidation. Reserve Bank has appointed directors, has appointed CEOs, and subsequently the bank has been under the control of the Reserve Bank. So Reserve Bank has got wide powers to control the management or the of the entire banking system. They can suspend or winding up the banking companies. Now, penalties for violation of the provisions of the Act. Suppose any bank is violating any of the provisions of the BR Act, Reserve Bank has power to impose the penalty. Recently, I think you would have read in the newspaper. A lot of banks have, Reserve Bank has imposed a lot of penalties on a lot of banks, especially for not following the KYC norms. There is a Prevention of Money Laundering Act is there. For Prevention of Money Laundering Act, you are supposed to follow the KYC norms. If you are violating the KYC norm, any bank has opened an account without following the KYC norms, that bank is subject to penalty by the Reserve Bank of India. And the penalty ranges from 5 crores, 10 crores like that, not a small amount, a big amount each bank has to pay to the Reserve Bank of India in case if there is a violation. In 1965, Act was amended to cover cooperative banks. Now, Reserve Bank is thinking of controlling, increasing its control over the cooperative banks, because cooperative banks is slightly in a disorganized sector. A lot of anomalies and difficulties are there in the cooperative sector. So, Reserve Bank is thinking of controlling, increasing the control over the cooperative banks. The Act was amended also to set up a deposit education awareness fund to take over inoperative deposit amount which have not been claimed or operated for a period of 10 years or more within a period of 3 months from the expiry of the said period of 10 years. Reserve Bank has come up with a deposit education and awareness fund. Basically, this fund has been constituted to collect the money in the inoperative accounts of the banks. You may be surprised that crores of rupees are in the inoperative accounts of all the banks, because some persons, they may open the account, subsequently they may forgot it or they may have expired, or some persons may not be able to trace out. So a lot of money is lying in all these accounts. So Reserve Bank has taken a decision that those accounts which is not operative for 10 years, the money in that account should be transferred to a depository education and awareness fund. So this fund will be used to create awareness among the public about the banking transactions. RBI is empowered under Section 36AA to remove any chairman, director, CEO, or other officer or employee of a banking company under the following circumstances. So as I told, Reserve Bank has got right to remove the chairman, board of directors of a banking company on following circumstances. One is a public interest. If the banks are not doing, as per the, if they are doing any harm to the public interest, this can be done. Second, preventing affairs of banking company being conducted in a manner detrimental to the interest of the depositors. Any banking company is doing an illegal type of an baseless lending without any securities. If the banks are lending to some persons, that may affect the depositor, because ultimately the money which is deposited by this public is using for the lending to other persons. So if such a thing happens, Reserve Bank has got a right to suspend the board of directors of that banking company. An appeal against the order of the removal lies with central government. So any person who is agreed by the order of the Reserve Bank for as far as removing of the director or suspension of the board, he can oppose the central government by way of an appeal. And Section 36 ACA empowers RBI to supersede board of banking company for a period of 6 months, which may be extended to 12 months. Reserve Bank is imposing moratorium on the basis of Section 36 ACA. So, if any bank went into liquidation or went into problem, Reserve Bank can Reserve Bank can declare moratorium and take control of the board of directors of that company. And Section 21 of banking regulation is very important because it empowers RBI to issue directions to regulate advances by banking companies. Suppose the bank is lending, a bank is not following the rules and regulations in lending, then the Reserve Bank can issue directions to that bank. Section 35A empowers RBI to issue directions to regulate banking companies. So any activities not as per the provisions of the Act is happening, Reserve Bank has got right to issue directions and control that activities. Section 36 empowers RBI to caution or prohibit banking companies generally or any bank company in particular against any transaction or class of transactions. Suppose if there is a money laundering activity, previously all what is happening is that many persons have opened the account in Binami names and they have deposited a lot of money, and this money was circulated through the banking system. So after that only this PMLA Act has come into force. PMLA Act says that whatever the money illegally a person has got it, suppose if you use this banking channel for transaction for doing circulation of that money, then immediately this matter should be informed to the Reserve Bank of India. So any transaction, any suspicion transaction done by any of the customers, this should be informed to Reserve Bank of India. So if any violation is there, Reserve Bank can impose penalty on the banking companies. And another important thing is that to obtain legal protection, the banks need to follow the know your customer norms. To obtain legal protection, it is obligatory for bankers to satisfy themselves as regards the identity of the person who decides to open an account with them. So it is very important that whenever a bank is opening an account, they should collect the know your customer documents. That means that there should be identity proof should be there. There will be an address proof should be there. So all these documents, with the documents only, you can open an account, because you should know who is the person who is opening the account and how his money is coming to his account. So know your customer guidelines issued by Reserve Bank requires banks to follow customer identification procedure for opening of accounts and to monitor transactions of suspicious nature, for reporting money laundering activities and combating financial terrorism. Any suspicion, any transactions happened in any account, this matter should be informed to the Reserve Bank of India. As you are aware, the banking channels have been used by the terrorists for financing the terror activities. So it has been increased a lot in for the couple of years. So banks have been RBI has cautioned all the banks to be very careful whenever any suspicious transactions are happening. This should be informed to the Reserve Bank of India. Apart from that, there is Section 131 of the NI Act. Probably, I think you are aware about the Negotiable Instruments Act. NI Act deals about the negotiable instruments. Negotiable instruments basically means check, promissory note, bill of exchange, drafts, etc. So, how this negotiable instruments can be used? That is what the NI Act says. So, NI Act 131 says that a banker who had in good faith and without negligence received payment for a customer of a check crossed generally or specially to himself shall not, in case the title to the check crossed defective, incur any liability to the true owner by reason only of having received such payment. That means whenever a bank is opening an account, they should collect the correct documents of the customer. Suppose the bank failed to collect the documents from the customer, and this customer somehow deposited some stolen check, and this bank has sent that stolen check to another bank for payment. Other bankers make the payment, and this person, the money was credited to this person's account. Subsequently, he withdraw the money. In that event, if there is a failure on the part of the bank in opening the account, that bank will also be responsible because bank has become a part of this this illegal transaction. So whenever a bank is opening an account, if you don't open the account as per the procedures of KYC norms, then bank will be difficulty. So, but in case suppose even though the stolen check, somebody has stolen the check and deposited in the account, but that account was opened after complying with all the KYC procedure, then that bank is not responsible. But if the KYC norms are not followed, then the bank which opened the account will also be responsible. So that is one section 131 of the NI Act. And another important aspect is that bank is under obligation to keep secrecy of the account details of the customer. See, in our bank, we are receiving a lot of RT applications. We are very concerned about other persons. We are receiving applications saying asking for the account details of a so and so person. Your neighbor may be interested to know your account details. So your neighbor may be very anxious to know how this person is making money, and he is purchasing new cars, he is constructing new building, how he is getting money. So let's give an application to the bank to understand how much amount he is having in his account. But Act says that you cannot disclose the account details of the customer to any other person. So somebody has given application saying that what is the total amount available in the person's in the so-and-so person's account. You cannot deny, you cannot give it an RT application because it is the responsibility of the bank to keep the account secrecy, the details of the account secrecy of the customer intact. Suppose if the bank disclose the account details, bank will be responsible. So now the question is, suppose income tax authority, income tax authority has initiated some proceedings against some customer. Income tax authority approached the bank. You please provide us the details of the account of this so and so person. Can we deny it? No, we cannot deny it because all statutory and if any information is requested by the statutory or enforcement authorities, we cannot deny because bank has to give it. Suppose you take the case of a police investigation. Some police investigation is going on. One person has stolen some money and deposited in your bank. So police is asking about the account details of that customer. So we are supposed to give it because it's a part of investigation. Police officer is asking. You take into case of you take if you can go to section 91 of the CRPC. It says that as part of investigation, a police officer can seek information from any banking institution. So whenever any statutory or enforcement authority is asking any information from the banks, we are supposed to give it. But any third person, your neighbor want to know your accounts, that cannot be provided. Now we can discuss about the relationship basically between the banks and the customer. There are two types of relationship. One is a debtor-creditor relationship. Another one is a borrower-depositor. Suppose you are depositing a money to the bank. You are a creditor. You are lending the money to the bank, and you are availing a loan from the bank. That means that your bank is giving a loan to you. So you are a debtor, and bank is a creditor. Now take the case of depositor. You are depositing the money in the bank. You are a depositor. If you borrow the money from the bank, you are a borrower. And apart from this, the bank is also acting as an agent of the customer also. Suppose you want to somebody has given you a check. You can deposit the check in your account. That the bank will send the check to the concerned bank and collect the money and deposit in your account. So bank is acting as a agent for the customer, and bank is acting as a suppose you got a shares in your company, you can inform the bank. The bank will collect the share dividend warrant on your behalf and deposit in your account. Pension, all these pensions are now distributed to the banks only. So bank will collect your pension from the state government or central government or your concerned organization and deposit in your account. So these are the important works the banks are doing now. Now there are two types of deposits in the bank. One is a time deposits, other one is a demand deposits. So whenever you are depositing the money, there are two types of deposit you can deposit. Either you can have a time deposit, otherwise you can have a demand deposit. Time deposits are repayable after an agreed period of say 1 year, 2 year, like for example fixed deposits or recurring deposits. You went to the bank, you have some 10 lakh rupees to want to deposit the bank. You can deposit money as a fixed deposit. Or for the fixed deposit means it's a time deposit. So you are depositing for 1 year. That means after 1 year only we can withdraw the money. After 1 year, you will can withdraw the money along with the interest. So this is called the time. If any stipulation is there for the deposits, it's called the time deposits. Other one is demand deposit. Demand deposits are repayable on demand. So if you require immediately, you can go to the branch and demand the money. So suppose you are deposit the money in the saving bank account. Saving bank is a demand account. That means you can, so today, now you want the money, you can go to the branch and demand the money. You can withdraw the money also. So demand deposit means immediately you can withdraw the money from the bank. So example for the demand deposit is a current account or a saving account. So currently, as RBI prescribes minimum and maximum period for which deposits can be accepted and prescribes rates only for NRI deposits, leaving rates to of other deposits for the discretion of the individual banks. Now you can see that for your deposits, fixed deposits itself, so many banks are giving different rates because RBI has not prescribed any specific rate of interest. So each bank can decide interest rate as per their economic, as per their financial conditions. Only period only RBI is prescribed minimum maximum period. The fixed deposit should be for this so and so period, but rate of interest is not been prescribed by the RBI. So that's why you can see different rate of interest in different banks. Now and all the new banks and new small finance banks, they require a lot of fund. So their rate of interest is very high. If you deposit money with them, the rate of interest is very high. So because there is a flexibility in fixing the rate of interest. Another one is a very important thing is the nomination. Suppose you deposit money in your bank, you can give a nominee. That is, after the death of your death, the money will go to so and so person. Previously, there was no provision for nomination. The problem is that once the depositor expires, all the legal ways will come to the bank and demand the money. There will be a dispute among the legal aid. So bank find extremely difficult to disburse the money after the death of a depositor. So that is where the nomination facility has been uh, introduced in all the banks. The section 45ZA of the Banking Regulation Act provides that a depositor or depositors may nominate one person as nominee to whom the deposit may be returned in the event of the death of the depositor or depositors. Suppose a person has deposited money, after his death, the money will go to the nominee. So the question is, the provision says that you can appoint only one nominee. There are case laws, a few case laws are there where the bank allowed a person to appoint two nominees. In one account, what happened? There are two nominees. Bank didn't object it. Then after the death of this person, the two nominees came to the bank and they demanded money. Then bank said that no, we can give only to one nominee. The provision of Bank Regulation Act says that there should be only one nominee, so we'll give only to one nominee. They went to the court. The court said that once you accepted the nomination of two persons, now you cannot reject it because by the principle of estoppel, you cannot deny it. Now you allow the people, you allow the customer to give it two nominees, you accepted it. Now you cannot say that the bank will give only to one nominee. So court directed that the amount should be equally distributed among the two nominees. But as a rule says that there should be only one nominee because if you two nominees also, there is a scope that litigation, two nominees will come and fight that I want this much of percent of this money. So there will be a lot of litigation will be there. To reduce that one only, the act prescribes that there should be only one nominee. The payment by a bank gives a valid discharge to the bank, but this does not affect the right or claim a person may have against a nominee in respect to the amount received by him. Just think about a situation where there are four legal heirs and nominee is a different person. So nominee bank disbursed the money to the nominee. Now there is a dispute among the legal heirs. They went to the court, and the court says that this money should be given to all the legal heirs. So nominee doesn't have nominee's right is only to receive the money. He is acting as a trustee only. Suppose some some persons come with the proof that this money belongs to them, then money has to be distributed to them. So nominee does not have a right to what do you call it? He does not have a right over this amount. He is only a trustee. Any valid person comes and claim this money, the amount should be given to that person only. Section 45ZZ and Section 45ZE provides that any person who leaves an article in safe custody and in safe lockers with a bank may nominate one person as nominee to receive the articles in the event of death of that person. So like that, fixed deposit, you can also keep your ornaments and gold ornaments in your bank lockers. So bank lockers also you can appoint one person as a nominee. So if otherwise, what will happen is that once the person is expired, there will be a fighting between the legal. It's difficult for the bank to distribute uh, the what are the ornaments inside the safe locker. Now we will just look into the loans and advances. Section 20 says that no banking company shall grant loans or advances on the security of its own shares. No loan or advance shall be provided to its director. That means a bank cannot give loan to its director. Suppose SBI has got so many directors. Bank cannot give any loan to a director. If it's allowed, what will happen? Bank will collapse because the director will take a lot of money from the bank. He will not repay it. So ultimately, the bank will come into collapse, liquidated. So that is where the restriction is that you cannot lend any money to your own director. Base rate system replace BPR system with that means base rate means every bank has to fix a rate of interest. Below that, they should not lend it. But that depends upon the credit worthiness, depends the security of the borrower. You can increase or decrease the rate of interest. Suppose a person having a good security, good possession in the market, the bank can give a lesser rate of interest, but not below the base rate. But a person comes without a security, his rate of interest will be higher. So depends upon the security and other aspects. Bank can decide upon the changes in the rate of interest in case of advances, but it should not below the base rate. And base rate also should be reviewed each quarter by the asset and liability committee. Is that each bank has asset and liability committee? They have to revise this rate of interest in each quarter. The Usurious Loans Act 1918 prohibits lending at exorbitant rates. Actually, the government is pushing the banking facilities to even the remote part of the country to avoid uh, uh, the public to use to get in the trap of the money lenders. In every area, even now, even villages also, you can see that a lot of money lenders are there. They're all collecting exorbitant interest. So to prevent them from collecting all this money, government is establishing more banks in all areas so that general public can go to the bank and take a loan at a very lesser rate of interest. So if any money lender is charging higher rate of interest, there is a provision under the Usurious Loans Act. So this under the provisions of this act, if any person is charging exorbitant interest rate, is punishable. That person can be punished under the provisions of this act. Section 21 is very important. It says that a transaction between a banking company and its debtor cannot be opened by any court on the ground that the rate of interest is excessive. Because suppose if there is a rate of interest, you avail the loan from the bank and 12% is the rate of interest fixed between you and the bank. There is a document executed between a bank and you. Tomorrow you feel that the rate of interest is very high. You went to the court saying that this rate of interest is very high, it should be reduced. But section 21 says that no court can, 21A says that no court can interfere if the rate of interest is fixed between the bank and the borrower. So even the court cannot interfere in fixing the rate of interest because that is the prerogative of the concerned banks. And once the interest rate is fixed as per the guidelines of Reserve Bank of India, court cannot interfere and refix the rate of interest. And another important act is that the Payment Act is the Payment and Settlement Systems Act 2007, which provides legal basis for netting and settlement finality. That means now you are doing internet banking. It is all governed by the provisions of Payment and Settlement Act. So net banking, NEFT, RTGS, all these are covered under the Payment and Settlement Act. Indemnity and guarantee is very important in banking sector. Indemnity basically important in insurance sector, but guarantee is very important in the banking sector. I will take you to indemnity first. Section 124 of the Contract Act defines an indemnity. A contract by which one party promises to save the other from loss caused to him by the conduct of the promisor himself or by the conduct of any other person is called the contract of indemnity. Indemnity means, suppose because of one person somebody has caused any loss, then I will make shift that loss. I will reimburse the loss. That is what the indemnity says. Best example for indemnity is insurance. If you suppose you have a car with you, you are taken insurance from New India Insurance Company. When you are driving the car, you hit a stranger, a pedestrian or a passenger. So he fell down, he went to the hospital, he got injury. Then he will file a case against you. Then you can say that you have to inform the insurance company. Insurance company will reimburse that person because there is a contract in the contract of indemnity between you and insurance company. When you are driving your car, if you hit somebody and you got injury, the insurance company will reimburse you. For that, you have to pay the premium. Now come to the guarantee. Indemnity means to save on the losses. Contract of indemnity is a contingent contract. Even though you have entered into a contract with the insurance company, if there is no accident, the insurance company will not reimburse you. So if any contingents, if any accident happens, somebody has got injury, thereafter only insurance company will come into the picture. So it's basically a contingent contract. Its performance is made depend upon the happening or non-happening of some event. So if accident happens, only the insurance company need to reimburse. Now, contract section 126 deals with the contract. A contract of guarantee is a contract to perform the promise or discharge the liability of a third person in case of his default. Suppose somebody has defaulted, suppose a borrower defaulted, then the guarantor will repay the bank. So everywhere and every transaction, bank is insisting that there should be a guarantor. Because if the borrower failed to pay the money to the bank will direct the guarantor to repay the money to the bank. So guarantorship is somebody, suppose somebody has promised something or there is a performance to be done. If you fail to do, then the guarantor will do that activity. That is what the contract of guarantee. The person who gives the guarantee is called the surety. So the person who is giving the guarantee is called the surety. So guarantor is a surety. I am assuring that if the borrower is not paying the money, I will pay the money. You can take my property and sell the property and adjust the dues of the borrower. The person the person who is giving the guarantee is called the surety. The person in respect to whose default the guarantee is given is called the principal debtor. That means that again, to whom on whose behalf you are giving a guarantee is called the principal debtor. The borrower is the principal debtor, and on his behalf the guarantor is giving the guarantee. And the person to whom the guarantee is given is called the creditor. To whom you are giving the guarantee is giving guarantee to the bank. So creditor is the bank. This is if you look into the bank guarantee, this is just reversal. Suppose a borrower, one of your customer has awarded some contract from the government. So government says that we will pay the money to you, but we want a guarantee to ensure that you will complete the project. So he will approach the bank. Bank will give a bank guarantee to the government department saying that if this person failed to perform the contract, we will give you the money. It's called the bank guarantee. So bank guarantee, the bank who is giving is actually the surety. The borrower, the customer who has availed the contract from the government is the principal debtor, and the government who is awarded the contract is called the creditor. And guarantee may be either oral or written, but in banking parlance, always we should have a written guarantee. Now we can just look into the difference between indemnity and guarantee. Indemnity, there is only two parties, you and insurance company, because you don't know who is going to be affected by your action. A person who is going on the, walking on the street may be hit by your car, so he is the third party. So insurance always, or indemnity will be between the two parties, only the person, insurance company and you. In case of guarantee, there are three parties: debtor, the principal, the borrower, the creditor, the beneficiary, that means the bank, and the surety. If you are giving a guarantee, you are the surety. Indemnity risk is contingent. It may happen or may not happen. Guarantee, the liability is subsisting. So long as this loan is outstanding, loan is continuing, the liability will be continuing. Indemnifier is required to make good the loss as soon as it occurs. If any incident happens, if you hit the car, if your car is hit with any passenger, if any pedestrian, then you have to, then the insurance company has to reimburse. Surety's liability is, in case of guarantee, surety liability is secondary and principal debtor is primarily liable. If the principal debtor, that means if the borrower failed to pay the dues to the bank, then only guarantor liability comes. Indemnity, there will be only one contract between the car owner and the insurance company. In guarantee, there are three contracts. One contract is between debtor and creditor. That means the borrower and the bank. Other contract is between the creditor and surety. That means the government company who sanctioned who was awarded the work to that borrower. There will be a contract between the government company and the contract and your borrower. And surety and debtor, that means there is we are giving, there will be a contract between bank and the borrower also. So in indemnity, it's a reimbursement of loss. Guarantee means security of the credit. I mean, you are giving a security for the amount and whatever the amount mentioned in the guarantee. If this person failed to comply with the guarantee, performance and contract, then the amount which is mentioned, the bank guarantee has to be paid to the beneficiary. So contract with minor is null and void. You would have studied in the Contract Act. A person below a person the age of minor, you cannot impose any liability on him. That means a contract signed by a minor is null and void. So if the bank has advanced some money to a minor, you cannot recover from him because he is not liable. Now look into the banking. There are certain exceptions to the minors contract. Normally banks do not finance to the minors. However, there is an exception where finance can be made for the benefit of the minor. So suppose education loan, you are even though you may not been major, education loan may be sanctioned to a person. So because for necessity, always you can lend the money, and for that, apart from that, also guarantee the parent will also be a party in that loan agreements. So security documents such cases are executed by the guardian on behalf of the minor also. But minor, a person who has attained 10 years can open an account. He can open a state bank, saving bank account. He can issue a check. He can negotiate instrument. All these things he can do, but he cannot incur a liability. He cannot give a bank cannot give a loan to him, but he can open his own saving bank account. He can deposit his money and withdraw. He can withdraw from that account also. And even partnership firm, minor can be a beneficiary, but minor will not be liable for all the liabilities of the partnership firm. But even if the minor has entered into a contract with other person, he is liable, but minor is not liable. So that is what the minor's position in contracts. Companies Act 2013, you would have studied it. Whenever the bank is creating any hypothecation or charge, whenever the bank is lending money, bank would create a charge of the assets of the company. So these charges need to be registered with the registrar of companies. Section 77 of the Companies Act says that whatever charges created by the company need to be registered with the ROC. So any charge on immovable property, mainly happen in case of a mortgage. So mortgage need to be registered with the ROC. Book debts for the company. Book debt means suppose company has already lent already given goods to suppliers, they are entitled to receive the money. It's called the book debts. And any charge on hypothecation mobile property need to be registered with ROC. Floating charge, if you have a stock, it's called a floating charge. Charge created on the float and stocks are called floating charge that need to be registered with ROC. So whenever the bank is financing to a company or any other company, you need to register these charges with the registrar of companies. And what is the consequence? Suppose if you don't register, whether mortgage will be valid, mortgage is valid, or what hypothecation is valid, but only thing that you will not, when the company is get into liquidation, you will not get any priority. So you will not be a secured creditor. So once all this, prior charges are paid, thereafter only your term will come. So charge, although not registered, is a valid charge against the company as long as it is a going concern. And limitation act prescribes a limitation for each document. Suppose you executed a demand promise note. It's a 3 years. One when it's become due from the within 3 years, bank need to file a case against the mortgage. If a customer is created a mortgage in favor of the bank, when it's become due within 12 years, you have to file a suit. Guarantee, if you invoke the guarantee within 3 years, you have to file a suit. Decree, whenever you got a decree in any court of law, you need to within 12 years you need to execute the decree. So I think probably you may studied about different companies. Public companies are there, private companies are there. A company is a legal person, and it is distinct from its members. You may be knowing about Solomon, all the important cases in the company law says that company is different, and lifting of the veil and all these things. Probably you would have studied, I think, in the company side. And company is limited by shares. So there are two important companies. One is public limited company. This public limited company shares can be, share can be listed on the stock exchange. Anybody can share of any public share of any public company. Like the case of Reliance, take the case of Tata's. All these are public companies. You can purchase these shares in the stock market. Private company means it's you cannot transact, you cannot sell the shares to a third person. Within members can only can hold the shares of a private limited company. And public limited company for you need two certificates for starting operation. One is a certificate of commencement of business, and other one is a registration certificate. So in case of a public company, you have to take two certificates. One is certificate of incorporation and certificate of commencement of companies. And you also, whenever you're financing a company, and you need to look into the memorandum. See, memorandum describes what is the borrowing power of each company. So you cannot finance a company above its borrowing power. So it is important to look into the memorandum association before financing a company. You also need to look into the article association, how the management, what is the constitution of the management of the company, borrowing powers of the company should be. Suppose if the company want to borrow above the amount which is mentioned in the memorandum, there should be a special resolution should be passed in the general meeting. Board resolution, and a company is acting through the board resolution because company doesn't have any eyes or ears. A company can act only through a board resolution. So whenever company want to take a decision, there should be a board resolution, a supporting board resolution. On the basis of board resolution only, you can decide, you can understand the transaction done by a company. And there is a best practices code is called BCSBI. It says that whenever the borrower is executing any documents to the bank is supposed to give a photocopies of all the executed documents. And if the borrower deposit title deeds, that need to be returned to the borrower within a period of 15 days time. Mortgage, I'll just take you to the mortgage. Mortgage is section 58A of the Transfer Property Act. Mortgage is the transfer of interest in specific immobile property for the purpose of securing the payment of money advance or to be advanced by way of loan on existing a future debt or the performance of an engagement which may give rise to pecuniary liability. Suppose you want to avail a housing loan. What you can do is that the property on which you want to create a house, you can mortgage that property in favor of the bank. So you are transferring the interest on that property for availing the loan. Suppose you fail to pay the loan to the bank will what the bank will do? Bank will sell this property and recover the money. So that is what is called the mortgage. Mortgage are three persons are there. Mortgager, the person who is depositing, borrower, that means the borrower. Mortgagee means the person who is accepting the mortgage, that's bank, and mortgage money. What are the money is mentioned in the mortgage deed. Basically, there are six types of mortgages. Simple mortgage, mortgage by conditional sale, usufructuary mortgage, English mortgage, mortgage by deposit title deeds, and anonymous mortgage. So usually in the banking sector, we are usually using the equivalent mortgage or mortgage by deposit title deeds. So whenever a bank is creating mortgage, that means you have to collect all the original title deeds. You have to take a confirmation regarding deposited title deeds by the borrower, and you have to create a memorandum of understanding regarding the mortgage that need to be registered with the registrar or that need to be registered with the sub-registrar office. And if it's a company, that need to be registered with the registrar of companies. Hypothecation section 2N of the Surface Act defines hypothecation. It says that charge in or upon any movable property existing or future created by a borrower in favor of a secured creditor without delivery or possession of the movable property to such creditor as a security for financial assistance and includes floating charge and crystallization of such charge into fixed charge on movable property. Suppose you want to avail a car loan from the bank. What the bank will do? Bank will create hypothecation charge over a car. That means bank will intimate your registrar office, RTO office, and they will create a charge, hypothecation charge over your document, registration certificate. So that is a proof that the bank is financed on the base of the hypothecation on the base of the car. Suppose if you fail to repay the dues, the bank will auction that we will sell that vehicle and recover the money. 172 deals with the pledge. Pledge says that bailment of goods for purpose of providing security for payment of debt or performance of promise. Pledge is happening in the case of a gold loan. Suppose you want to avail a gold loan, you have to deposit the ornaments. So it's a pledge. It's actually transfer of goods for purpose of providing security for payment of. So bank is giving you money on the base of the security. So gold loan is a security. So best example for pledge is the gold loan. And banker's lien, section 171 of the contract says that a banker has got a banker's lien, says that lien is the right of a bank to retain possession of goods and securities owned by the debtor until the debt due from the later is paid. Suppose you have deposited some money with the bank, or you deposit title with the bank. You have got other loans also to repay to the bank. You are not paying, that means that bank can hold the document till you repay the other loans. Right of set off, that is also a banker's right. A set off is a right of a debtor to take into account. That means if there is a you have a saving bank account, you have a 10 lakh rupees balance a saving bank, you got a loan account with another 10 lakh rupees, you are not paying. The bank, what the bank can do, this 10 lakhs in the saving bank account can be adjusted toward the housing, your loan account. That is what is called the set off, right of set off. And in bank, because our housing loan, all these documents are running for 15-20 years. So for saving the documents, limitation, banks used to take the revival letters. Bank used to take the balance confirmation from the borrower balance sheet in case of company's balance sheet. Limitation Act, the Limitation Act is deals about limitation. If you are not able to, bank is not able to file within limitation, then bank will lose the right to enforce the security. Then essentials of acknowledgement means whenever bank is taking acknowledgement, it should be in writing. The borrower should confirm that bank is liable to pay so and so money to the bank. So with this, I would like to conclude it. Yeah, I'm ready to take any further questions. So we will clarify further when you are answering the questions. Thank you. Thank you so much for your patient hearing.
Thank you so much, sir, for such enlightening, informative, highly insightful session. Really, you have covered all the essential aspects of the banking law. Thank you so much, sir. So now I'll move on to the interactive session. I urge and request all the participants to make this session more interactive with a lot of insightful questions related to the topic. So now I will read on the questions one by one. I request the participants to kindly post your questions in the chat box. Yeah, I'll read the questions one by one, sir. We'll be taking only limited questions. So I'll go by the order in the chat box. So the first question is from Mr. M. Prakasan. Sir, how to control the money laundering cases? Whether the problems may arise from the lender or the banker's side? This is the first question. From Mr. Prakasan.
Okay. Actually, money, as far as money laundering provisions are concerned, RBI issued a guidelines. Whenever there is a suspicion, generally, about 10 lakh, whatever transaction happening in account about 10 lakh, that need to be reported to the RBI. There is a system by which every day you have to report these transactions to RBI. So RBI will be able to understand if there are any suspicion. Suppose if the bank is able to understand there is a suspicion in the account, that need to be reported. And for prevention of pardon? Yes.
Sir, we are unable to hear you.
Sir, you can continue, sir.
Okay.
You
Okay.
can continue, sir. Yes, you can
Yes,
continue. Yes. yes.
So actually, in anti-money laundering, there is a department itself in each bank. So that bank is that department is verifying whatever the inputs are coming from the branches. So if any suspicious transactions are there, they need to be reported to the RBI, and thereafter RBI will take necessary actions because there is an economic wing of the CBI is there, different departments are there. So this information will be passed over to the concerned department, and further investigation will be done by them. So bankers said, I think there is a specific guidelines are there, report formats are there. This transaction should be reported to the RBI on a daily basis. Right. I think I
Thank you, sir. Yes, thank you, sir. The next question is from Mr. Parichay Gautam. Can the government department investigator demand account details, statements in the name of investigation just verbally without any valid paperwork regarding the same? If the investigation is based on account transactions only as per the investigator, then on what basis is his investigation based upon without having the account statements, etc. in the first place? This is the question from Mr. Parichay Gautam.
Yes. No, actually, whenever there is a requirement comes, when we need to, suppose in case of police investigation, police officer will give a letter to the bank saying that we are doing so and so. We have registered a complaint or registered a case, and these much of documents are required for as part of investigation. So after verifying that request, only bank can provide it. It's not that a police officer will come and ask for that one. There should be a documents to prove that the investigation is going on, the case has been registered, and after certifying and after verifying all these things, only bank will be able to provide the details. It's not that police officer will come and demand it. On the basis of section 91 of the CRPC is very clear that whenever a police officer demand a document from the bank as part of investigation, bank is bound to do it. So whenever he's submitting an application as per section 91, we are providing to the concerned police officer.
Thank you, sir. So there is the next question from Neeta Kurian, School of Law. What are your views on the decriminalization of dishonor of checks?
Yeah, now I think Supreme Court, yes, now the process is underway because Supreme Court has taken, initiation in decriminalization of the 138 matters. Because if you look into the all the magistrate courts, majority of the
Participants kindly mute your audio.
I think some echo is coming. Yes.
Participants kindly mute your audio. It's my humble request to the participants. Please mute your audio to ensure the smooth running of the session. It's my humble request to the participants.
Yes. So in judicial magistrate courts, majority of the cases are filed under the section 138. So if we can decriminalize this, the large load on this judicial magistrate court can be reduced. So Supreme Court is also thinking that way, because I think see, the problem is to give a criminality to this check cases. The intention is that people should think twice before issuing a check. They should not, because the commercial transaction, they should not, because civil cases and it's take a lot of time, and because criminal cases, once you become as a criminal, that means you have to go and take a bail and all the procedures are there. So the intention behind this criminalization is that people should think twice before issuing a check. So, but now the problem is that majority of the magistrates courts are dumped with this 138 matters. So I think now we got other provisions also. Now 138. We got online transactions are there. We got payment settlement act. There is a mandate. There is a what do you call? Standing instructions are there. So technology has advanced a lot. I think now it's a time to decriminalization of this 138. I'm also in favor of that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So there's another question from Advocate Mr. Mukhtar Kabir. He is asking whether the Chennai Petroleum Corporation Limited shares he has invested in, whether it is safe or not, whether it is worth.
I'm not in a position to give any comments on the shares value. You know, you can consult your
profit-based question.
Yes, some investment brokers and verify whether it can be purchased or not.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. Next question. So participants, I can understand that the chat box are flooded with a lot of questions, but we are only taking the very important questions. So sorry to the participants, but I appreciate the enthusiasm of all the participants with flooding the chat box with a lot of questions. So thank you to the participants for that. So another question is that I'll read out the question, sir. There is a question from Mr. Parichay Gautam has texted 3 questions. I'll be reading his third question. Loan agents ask for 10 to 25% of loan amount. How can a Mudra loan, MSME loan, small farmer manage this commission amount? On top of that, if the loans agents commit fraud in the cahoots with the bank staff, even usurping the borrower's money in some cases, and the borrower is liable for the total amount, then who would be held responsible if the borrower commits suicide or absconds?
No, I don't think there is any. There is no need to give any commission because Mudra loan are all dispersed through the banks branches only. Nobody, I think, no bank has enlisted any commission agent to sanction, or to avail any Mudra loan. If anything is happening, I think that is not without the permission of the banks. So there is no question of any commission. Whatever the commission as per prescribed by the RBI, that only need to be, whatever the charges, processing charges and other charges, insurance charges, all these are statutory charges as per the prescription given by the Reserve Bank of India. It's only collected. There is no question of any commission. I don't know why the borrowers are approaching commissioners. There is no need for any commission. Borrowers can directly go to the branch and avail the loan as per the guidelines issued by the government of India. So I don't think there is any question of any commission. If anything has happened, I think it's illegal. It's not permitted by the provisions of the Act.
Okay, thank you, sir. And I requested participants to make your questions very precise and short. Participants are asking questions in a big paragraph. So we are only taking the precise and exact question, which is easy for the smooth running of the session. So there is a question from S. Sudhir Chandran. What is currency chest?
Yeah, currency chest actually in each district, whatever the money. So many banks are in each district. So suppose you take the case of 10 banks are working in a particular area, or 10 or 15 banks are in a district. Each bank, suppose so many people would have deposited money in the account in the each bank's branches. So all this money cannot be kept there. It's not safe also. What will happen? What the banks are doing? Evening, they will collect whatever the money they are required for running tomorrow's transaction. They will keep it. Balance amount they will move to the Reserve Bank of India currency chest. So all these, suppose 15 banks are there. All the surplus money from the 15 banks will by evening it will deposit in the currency chest. Next day morning, each bank will demand it. I record because I want to sanction a loan. I want to disperse a 1 crore loan. So please give me 1 crore. So the bank will give 1 crore. Accordingly, the account of the bank will be adjusted. So this is what the currency is. So instead of branches are keeping this money, the money will be pooled together and it will be deposited in the currency in the Reserve Bank of India. And next day morning, as per the requirement of each bank, it will be distributed. That is what is the currency chest.
Yes, thank you, sir. So once again, I request participants to kindly make your question very short and precise. And now I'll move on to the another question. So in banking sector, what are the hacking issues? This is the question postulated by Mr. Danish. What are the hacking issues in the banking sector? Question
What
from
are
Mr.
the-
Danish.
What are the?
Hacking issues, hacking issues in the banking sector.
Okay. That is, you are saying that fraud and online fraud and everything, isn't it? Yes. No, hacking issue in the sense that banking sector, of course, there are a lot of issues like online fraud, and your password has been, hacked by somebody else and using it. So this is what is required is that we should be very careful, because a lot of people are calling you, asking for your password, asking for a credit card number, asking for your CVV number behind the credit card. So this is happening because we are also contributing. Somebody is asking something. No bank, I think none of the banks will ask for your password. None of the banks will ask for your user ID and password. If somebody is asking, that is very suspicious. If somebody is asking for a password, that means that he wants to steal the money from you. And OTP, no bank will ask you by phone to give you OTP. Many transactions, many frauds are happening because somebody OTP will come to your account, then he will ask you OTP and you will share the OTP. Once you share the OTP, the money will take out from your account. So I think each person has to be very well aware about the risk involved in transactions, online transactions, because you are only, I mean, everything is done on the basis of password. If your password is changed, you stolen, that entire money will be taken from your account. So you have to be very careful in online transaction. You have to keep this password very confidential. You should not share the OTP, or none of the details should be shared to anybody. And all the banks, including SBI, every time we are sending messages to the customers that don't disclose any of our account details to any other person. So at any cost, you should not disclose any of the details. In case if you disclose something, immediately you contact the branch and stop the transactions. If it's a credit card, immediately contact the credit card company and stop the operation of the credit card. So that is the only solution.
Thank you, sir. There is another question from Ms. Parita Nisha. She's a student of LLM Taxation Law in School of Excellence in Law, TNDALU. So her question is that how a law student can get the internship at bank?
Uh, but at SBI, actually, SBI, there is no provision for internship. I'm not aware about the private banks. In case you want to do an internship, I think you have to approach the concerned branch. In your locality, branches are there. So branches, you have to approach the concerned branch, and they will forward their application to the concerned administrative office. Once the administrative office is given the permission, it can be done. And I think if you institution, suppose some institutions has got some tie-up with these banking organizations, if that is there, I think it is well and good. It will not be an issue. But if there is no such tie-up is there, it depends upon individual branches. So you have to approach the concerned branch, put up your application, and once they got an approval from the administrative office, it is possible. But in SBI, there is no system of doing the internship. I'm not sure about other banks, so you need to check it up with the concerned branch.
Yes, sir. Yes. There is another question from Ms. Tamil Mani. How to control the online bank frauds? Because even after the reform period, the online bank frauds are affecting the rural account holder.
Yes. No,
So
as
how
I
to
told
control the
you,
online?
yes. No, online banking, you have to be very vigilant and careful while you are disclosing all these details. One thing is, suppose even after you do all the precautions, as I told you, even after you do all the precautions, if any online fraud is happening in account, you need to inform the branch immediately. You need to inform the branch, and you have to branch will take up with. Suppose if any fraud has happened, even without your knowledge or without your sharing of the password, then immediately the police. There's a fraud cell is there in all police stations and police departments. You have to give a complaint to them. Accordingly, they will conduct investigation and do the needful. So, but the only thing is that we have to be very vigilant, because many of the times, since the customer or customers are not vigilant, they are not concerned about the password and other details. That is why these people are making use of this one. So, first thing is that we have to be very vigilant. And second thing is that if after you become so vigilant, also something is happened, you will report immediately the matter to the bank, and the bank will advise you to take up with the concerned police station, or will do the needful.
Yes. Thank you, sir. We are taking one last question. This is a question from Dr. R. Deepa Lakshmi ma'am. Is Bitcoins safe to use?
Another?
Is Bitcoin safe to use or not? Bitcoins are safe or not?
Bitcoin, RBI, as far India is concerned, RBI has not given permission for Bitcoins. They are still doing a lot of research. And unless and until RBI permits Bitcoin, it's not valid in India. Even other countries, they are having permission there. But as far as India is concerned, unless and until RBI issued direction or guidelines regarding the use of Bitcoin, it's not valid. That means as of now, you cannot have a Bitcoin. It cannot be enforced in India. Means legal system in India has not accepted the Bitcoin yet. that need to be happen only if the RBI issues any directions or guidelines in this regard. So we'll wait for that. If anything has happened, then you can do it. As of now, I think there is no permission.
Yes, thank you, sir. And due to the, as we are running out of time, only limited questions we were able to take it. And I sincerely thank all the participants, pan-India and across the world, for your enthusiasm in asking a lot of questions. Really thank all the participants sincerely for this. And also, sir, many participants, they have appreciated your session. Your session was eye-opening session, and they all appreciated your session. And it's very useful to many participants. They have posted in the chat boxes. You can also go through it. And
Yes.
thank you so much, sir, for being a proud alumni coming to the institution where you have studied and the alma mater and delivering such an insightful, informative, and wonderful lecture session. Thank you so much, sir, for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
now I'll move on to the vote of thanks. Professor Dr. Kumudaratna ma'am, HOD of the Department of Business Law and PG Director, due to her health issues, she was not able to take part in today's session. On behalf of Madam, Professor Himani ma'am will be delivering the vote of thanks. Welcome you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, sir. I hope I'm audible. On behalf of the
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Thank you, Abhishek. On behalf of the fraternity of the Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University and on behalf of the Department of Business Law, I take this opportunity to thank you for such a wonderful session. Though it was, you could have spoken more about it, but you covered almost all the aspects of banking law, and you spoke at length about the relationship between the RBI, the customers, the another legislations which are connected to the banking law, and it was very helpful to us. Being a student of business law, I can relate to whatever all you said. So thank you very much, sir, from all of us from the university. I also take this opportunity to thank our registrar, sir, Professor Dr. Balaji, sir. I thank Dr. Harita, ma'am. I thank our very own Ranjit, sir, who is our go-to when it comes to banking law. So thank you to the other HODs as well. I also take this opportunity to thank Kumudaratna ma'am for getting this entire session arranged and for guiding us always when it comes to business law sessions like these. And I thank other HODs, the teaching faculties, and the professionals, the banking professionals who are here to, I can see so many different names who are here to listen to your lecture, and I could make out that they liked the lecture a lot from all the wonderful comments that they have left for you, sir. And not to forget the students. So I thank the students of the university and other colleges who have joined us. So thank you very much, sir. And I, on a lighter note, I saw a message from one of the students how to intern with banking in the banking sector. So I think you should have another session to guide the students on this area as well. So your guidance, we shall carry a piece of it at least with us whenever we think about banking law. Thank you very much, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much.